All right, everybody, welcome back to PODIO Commentary, episode number 3. My name is Matt Jarbo, and we're going to beach the whole world off today talking about most likely, and I'm just going to be fair when I say this right off the bat, despite whatever my feelings on this movie might be, what we're talking about is largely the cinematic event of the summer. It wasn't Across the Spider-Verse. It wasn't The Flash. It wasn't Transformers. It wasn't Elemental. It wasn't Indiana Jones. It wasn't Mission Impossible. It's Barbie. How weird is that to say out loud? That a movie that when it was initially announced way back in the day was something that was so lauded, so hated, so lambasted that it ended up crashing. And we're going to talk all about that. But it came back in a way that has just blown up. And this movie could go on to make $1 billion. I'm recording this on the 24th of July, just days after the film's release. So whatever happens after this is going to be anyone's guess for how far this movie will go. But there's no denying that it is the event of the summer, if not probably the whole year. The Barbenheimer situation. But again, we're going to be talking a bit about that here. So Barbie is a movie that I'm not going to sit there and say that I was like the most excited for, that I was the most intrigued for. The very first teaser trailer mimicking Stanley Kubrick, I was like, all right, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was like, I get it. But I mean, but it also kind of showed you that maybe you weren't in for the Barbie movie you thought you were going to be in for. And that's, again, like the really interesting factor when you start thinking about how this movie ultimately plays out. When we talk about subverting expectations, right? A lot of times, a lot of us will look at, like, let's say, like The Last Jedi, and like we look at it negatively in regards to subverting expectations. But in this movie, in this particular case, it's not. It really has an interesting way of just kind of getting in under your skin and really having something to say, even if I feel it doesn't quite get there and it kind of loses itself towards the end of the film. But what I like to do for those of you who watch this live, thank you for one. I will be dropping the call-in link. It will be available towards the end. You guys can call in, give your thoughts. I want to hear them. And then if you're listening to this on podcast form after the fact, you can always find us at youtube.com/PODIO commentary following Hollywood After Dark, where we tackle new movies. And of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, because this isn't just about me talking about something. I am desperate to know what you guys say about stuff as well. So that's going to be part of the fun tonight. So why don't we talk about where this movie began? Because I feel like the story of Barbie, leaving Barbie land, going into the real world, fish out of water story. We've seen it a million times. It's literally not anything new. And this movie doesn't even really like expand upon that in a way that makes it unique. But it uses it as a launching board to talk largely about patriarchy, matriarchy, inequality, classism, battle of the sexes, all these things that are just really interesting. Some subtle, some not so much. But you can see the response from some people on the internet as to like them really not getting it. And I know I had my own take while watching it, but I've really tried to spend a lot of time today thinking about the movie itself and largely the messaging it wants to convey. But like I said, as the show breaks down, for those of you who are new to PODIO commentary, I like to talk about the writer and the director, talk about how the film was made, and then go into my thoughts on it, and then talk about the critical, the box office, any controversies, of which there's a very interesting one in regards to this movie. And then, of course, take your guys' calls. So the writer and director of this movie is Greta Gerwig. And Greta Gerwig has been making a very, very good name for herself directing. This is probably her biggest endeavor. This is definitely her biggest hit. Greta Gerwig made her debut as a director back in 2017 with the movie Lady Bird. And the movie Lady Bird went on to get a lot of accolades. A lot of people really liked it. And this kind of set the stage for her to then make her way over to Little Women, which was another relatively big hit within that community, within that world. A lot of people liked it. It keeps getting recommended to me. Eventually I'll watch it, and that movie had a really big ensemble cast, right? You had Saoirse Ronan, Emma Watson, Florence Pugh, Eliza Scanlon, Timothy Chalamet, Laura Dern, Meryl Streep. I mean, and her direction received widespread acclaim. And the film actually, when I say it did well, largely it had 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay. So going off of having a movie, Little Women, which is, it's an adaptation of a book, a good book, going from that and getting the Barbie gig is really kind of wild to an extent, because Greta herself also has had a pretty impressive acting career. She's appeared in several independent films, including Mumblecore Productions, and became known for her natural and charismatic performances. You might have seen her in Frances Ha from 2010, Mistress America from 2015, Greenberg in 2010, as well as 20th Century Women in 2016. She's been in a few other things since then as well. She was in a movie with Russell Brand, and I just happened to forget which movie that was. But her approach to filmmaking is largely what we're going to be talking about, and it has been characterized by her ability to capture authentic human emotions and relationships on screen. She will explore the themes of identity, family dynamics, and the complexities of growing up, and her films are known for having strong female characters and an emphasis on female perspectives. And that is when I think of the controversy here with the people online who are just kind of freaking out about this movie. It's like they've never heard of a Greta Gerwig movie. It's like they don't understand that there's going to be strong female characters, strong female performances, and all of those kind of things. But what really cracks me up the most, though, is that it's like they are wanting the movie to be something they already know it's going to be, so they can just attack it. It shows you that there is a great deal of dishonesty in regards to the approach to the criticisms of this movie, right? And that's largely what I think the takeaway from, if you ever look into any of the discourse online, you're not going to get that here on this show, but if you ever look at the discourse online, you're going to see a fair amount of that one. So that's the director of the movie, right? And what she was able to accomplish was no small feat, especially because we have to go back about 7 years ago when it was announced that Amy Schumer was going to be in the Barbie movie. The very first live action Barbie movie was going to star Amy Schumer. Yeah, it is most definitely a what the hell sort of situation. And at the time, a lot of people, including myself, were very curious as to what exactly was going to be happening with an Amy Schumer led, and I believe Diablo Cody written Barbie movie, right? And if you ever saw the movie I Feel Pretty that came out after she left the project, you can kind of start to see like the remnants of maybe what that idea was kind of going into that film, right? Because it was largely about body positivity, which is not something that's necessarily on display in this Barbie film, but that's, for good reason. So here's what we know is that the original Amy Schumer movie was announced in December 2016 with Amy Schumer set to star as the iconic Barbie doll. The concept of the movie was to create a contemporary comedic take on the Barbie character, with Schumer portraying Barbie as a woman who doesn't fit in to the traditional perfect Barbie mold. And again, I don't think that's going to be very much out of a lot of people are not going to have any trouble picking up on that. It wasn't the most subtle approach, to be fair. But in the proposed storyline, Schumer's character would have been a misfit in the Barbie world where everyone was expected to, look and behave a certain way. And the film was intended to be a satirical and self-aware comedy that challenges the ideas and stereotypes associated with Barbie, aiming to deliver a positive message about self-acceptance and embracing one's uniqueness. And that theme did somewhat carry over to this movie, albeit not as directly on the nose. However, the project did face several setbacks, and the controversies surrounded it quite a bit during its development. One of the main issues was the creative differences between Amy Schumer and the studio executives, one of those being Amy Pascal, because Pascal Pictures was set to produce this movie. Also, interestingly enough, Amy Pascal produced Little Women with Greta Gerwig, but Amy Pascal did not produce this movie, and we'll talk about that. So Schumer was known at the time, and she's still known for, even all these years later, for her edgy and irreverent humor. And she reportedly had a vision of the movie that clashed with the more family-friendly, brand-conscious approach that Mattel and the studio wanted to take. Now, at the time in 2016, though, Amy Schumer was contentious. There were some incidences around that time with fans where she believed one person was, was like filming her without her permission, and that's the whole thing. And then you also had an incident in 2015 with Trainwreck, where a person in Louisiana walked into a theater and opened fire. And so that kind of put her in the public spotlight because we learned that her cousin is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. So that was kind of interesting. And it was a whole bunch of stuff going on. She also was accused of stealing jokes from the dead Patrice O'Neill. And a lot of people just didn't like Amy Schumer. She kind of became like a really big punching bag. And there was also a story she told at the time, largely about taking advantage of a guy that she knew was drunk. And that ended up kind of coming out as well. So having a movie where she's meant to play this kind of like feminist girl boss, self-acceptance, embracing uniqueness, loving who you are, and there was all the controversy surrounding that at the time, it would have, you can almost see why the creative differences happened and why she decided to step down from the project. Of course, she cites creative differences, but there was a lot of speculation at the time about creative disagreements from the executives really kind of like influencing that decision. So at that particular point, after Amy Schumer's exit, the future of the Barbie movie remained in limbo for quite some time. And eventually the project underwent an overhaul when the rights for the Barbie movie left Sony and returned to Mattel. And it was around this time, in January of 2019, that it was announced that Margot Robbie would be taking over the role of Barbie and that she would be bringing in a new creative team under her Lucky Chap Productions. And there was literally nobody out there that was going to look at Margot Robbie and think to themselves, you know what? Margot Robbie is not Barbie incarnate. There's been some weird takes on Twitter. People have tried to argue that she's mid in regards to being attractive. And it's like, everyone is like, are you simple? Like, did you eat paint chips as a child? What are you talking about? What are you doing? What are you saying? Margot Robbie is one of the most attractive women on the planet. Hands down, bar none. If anything, like, dudes went to go see this movie with their girlfriends going like, well, if the movie sucks, at least I can look at her. I saw the movie by myself. So there's that. But no, she's attractive, but it's like that she wasn't like that, played very little impact on me in watching the movie and trying to get the story. It's like, you could tell some guys definitely did that. But that being said, when Margot Robbie was cast, the film did seem to shift its focus towards a more like marketable and traditional view of Barbie, not having, hate to say it, fat Barbie, which is probably what Amy Schumer would have been. And because that's also her shtick. That's also what she does, right? So they wanted to develop more of a positive message about individuality and self-acceptance, which is something this movie actually does pretty well. So now you've got Margot Robbie as a producer, and the film then decided to go through multiple stages just trying to get it off the ground, right? So how Margot Robbie even got involved, and I'm kind of getting a little bit, I was a little bit ahead of myself on this one. We got to go back to August of 2018. So just a few months before it was announced that she was involved, a man by the name of Robbie Brenner, not Margot Robbie, but Robbie Brenner, was hired as the producer of Mattel's film department by the Mattel CEO, Ynon Kreiz, if I'm saying that correctly. And after Sony, their option expired in October of 2018. I was wrong. The rights then reverted or were then transferred over to Warner Brothers, who had somehow got their hands on it. But it was during this time that, everything kind of shuffled around. Then, of course, Margot Robbie came on in, and it was at that point she was trying to like pitch the movie to get it made. She actually was like, went to the producers at Warner Brothers and she said that this movie is like Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. And she suggested that it could gross over $1 billion. And she's really like talking up this Barbie movie as being this $1 billion endeavor, which, look, she might have actually been a profit on that one. Let's be fair. This movie could effectively pull in $1 billion. And she was hopeful to get the green light. And it turns out that they were okay with this. They liked Greta Gerwig as being the voice to write the movie. At the time, she wasn't agreed to just direct. She was only agreeing to write the script because she was in the post-production phase of Little Women. But she also then decided to bring on her partner, Noah Baumbach, and work on writing the screenplay to get together. And then, of course, it was they started working on it, and during COVID, which I'll talk about that here in a second. But it wasn't until July of 2021 that she signed on to direct the movie. So again, it really shows you that, like, she was committed to this project, and Margot was really committed to getting her voice. And then when she became available, they wanted to bring her in. And that to me makes all the sense in the world, because it's like, yeah, like Greta is a very good director. Now, having seen the movie, I can at least say I've seen one of her films and it was directed very well. And I get the voice that they were going for. So let's talk about writing the movie, because this is where I usually like to get the most info. Greta and Noah were given complete creative freedom to write this movie. And that, I believe, is one of the key takeaways of the success of this film, and even like Oppenheimer with the Barbenheimer weekend, because they were given that full creative ability to just tackle this story from their best viewpoint. They collaborated on the screenplay during the COVID lockdown of 2020 and 2021, describing the process as open and free. Her film treatment was an abstract poem on Barbie influenced by the Apostles' Creed. She drew inspiration from various sources, including the book Reviving Ophelia, classic Technicolor musicals, and her own childhood experiences with Barbie. And I think if you watch the movie, you can definitely see where the Technicolor musicals come into play, which is why this movie, hands down, has a lock for best set design and best costume design. Like, just like production design and costume design, it's already going to win. Like, there's going to be technical awards this movie is going to win, if not nominations for best, I don't know if it's original screenplay or adapted screenplay. That's actually currently being discussed over at Warner Brothers, but also like best director, best actor, best actress. I mean, even maybe best supporting for America Ferrera. There's going to be, this movie is, in Oppenheimer, are both going to be pulling in severe nominations. These movies are going to go to head again for the Oscars next year. Largely, I won't be watching because I never watch the Oscars anymore, but still, it's kind of exciting to be fair. Round two sort of thing. Which one is going to pull out the greater win, Nolan or Gerwig? That's going to be a thing. Anyway, the script that she submitted, it did contain quite candid criticism of Mattel, which did cause skepticism among Mattel officials at first, but the CEO decided to trust Greta's vision, which is actually really interesting, because these guys largely, they get kind of, made fun of, parodied a little bit in the movie. And while they take their job seriously, they also have said that they are not above laughing at themselves. They don't take themselves seriously, which is one of the reasons why the board was kind of made up the way that it was, which I thought was really interesting. Now, also, she wanted to create a film that both celebrated the feminism behind Barbie while also addressing the controversial beauty standards associated with the doll. The movie deliberately juxtaposed contradictory messaging, critiquing consumerism while glamorizing plastic products. And it also did the same thing with gender dynamics, matriarchy versus patriarchy. I mean, the more you really start to kind of look at this movie from like just a scripting perspective, never mind the finished product, you really start to see that they went into this thing and just decided to throw everything they could at the wall. And they had a point to do it too, which is always a good thing, but they had a point, which is really fascinating. Gerwig wanted to affirm the worth of women and convey the impossibility of perfection, reflecting on the maximalism of Barbie akin to Shakespeare's words. She described the film as anarchic, unhinged, and humanist. I'm mispronouncing that word there. Hate when I do that. With elements mirroring a girl's journey from childhood to adolescence. Barbie's transition from utopia to reality and the tragic elements faced by Barbie and Ken were central to the story. I mean, very much so, obviously, with what happens with Ken and Ken's entire arc in the movie. That's something that does resonate, I think, with a lot of men who have viewed the film. But they're also grappling. I think a lot of the crazier ones are having trouble grappling with how it made them feel. And even myself included, I'll fully admit that, right? Because again, you have your instant reaction and then you've got the time to think about it, process it a little bit more. And that's largely what I spent today doing. The movie also exposed and explored the negative consequences of hierarchical power structures, depicting Barbies as the ruling class and Ken's as an underclass. In fact, Ken's low self-esteem and desire for Barbie's approval provided a compelling source for the story arc. And it really is true. Like, he was desperate for her approval. There's a line in the opening of the movie where the narrator says that Ken just waits all day at the beach for Barbie to look at him. You know, she doesn't know where they live. She doesn't care where they live. None of the Barbies care about the Kens. It's not just that they're like second-class citizens, they're third, fourth, fifth-class citizens. Like, legitimately, the hierarchy of power, the powers that be, do not give one iota of a crap about Ken in the slightest, which is largely a commentary on how Ken was simply just created as an accessory and was just there as a way to elevate Barbie rather than to be his own person. Now, when it came to casting Ken, this is where things do get a little bit interesting because Greta wanted Ryan Gosling. She wanted Ryan Gosling, and she had no one else in mind. That's who she wanted right off the bat. She thought he was perfect for the role. Even though she'd never met him, she was adamant that he was the only choice for the character. Both Margot and Greta were determined to get Ryan Gosling to play Ken in the film and would simply not take no for an answer. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Greta expressed her conviction, stating, "From the moment that Margot came to me and I knew we were making this for Margot, I equally knew that we were making this for Ryan." She envisioned Gosling as a combination of Marlon Brando, Gene Wilder, John Barrymore, and John Travolta, showcasing a unique and gloriously unhinged portrayal of Ken. And if you think of it, yeah, there was a little bit of like Tennessee Williams, right? A Streetcar Named Desire, Stella, right? A little bit of that performance, a little bit of Gene Wilder over the top. I'm not too familiar with John Barrymore, to be honest with you, but definitely you could see a little bit of like the way that Travolta carried himself in like Grease and Saturday Night Fever and things like that. So it's a very interesting way of looking at it. And the way that Gosling brought his performance to the table, I have to agree. He did a really good job on that one there. She was actually, this being Greta Gerwig, was impressed with Gosling's commitment and dedication to the role, describing him as a secretly comedic actor who takes comedy very seriously. And I mean, if you watch the movie, you think that Ken is like, you think the way Ryan Gosling is playing it is just kind of playing it up. He feels like he's just kind of like hamming up the scenes. And largely he is, but there is now, once you get through the whole movie, you kind of can go back and look at some of those scenes and be like, yeah. Like it's a very deliberate play on what his character is feeling. He wears his heart on his sleeve. There's not really anything too deep about Ken, and that's by design. So everything we see is truly who he is, how he feels, how he acts, what he believes. It's a very deep, superficial performance, if that's the best way to describe it. And even Gosling has said that the script was the best script he ever read. And he even told a story about after he had talked to Greta, read the script, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to do it. He went outside to where his two daughters were playing, and they had both been playing with Barbies. and he found a Ken doll face down in the mud right next to a squished lemon. He took a snapshot of it, sent it to Greta Gerwig, and says, "I shall be your Ken, for this story must be told." And with that energy, we got a really good performance out of Ryan Gosling. And it wasn't like that was ever up for question, right? That was never up for question. We always knew Ryan Gosling was going to give a good performance. Now, one of the things I thought was really fascinating about this movie, like really good about this movie, was the fact that the set design was so freaking good. It was really good. It was practical. It felt plastic. I mean, obviously that's the choice. That's what they were going for. You know, Sarah Greenwood was the set designer. And, you know, in order to capture the essence of the Barbie dream house, the team drew inspiration from like mid-century modernist architecture in Palm Springs. Never mind, usually Barbie Land, Barbie World lives in Malibu, but they really wanted to base this off of Palm Springs, which I thought was uniquely interesting. And again, even Gerwig wanted to capture the joyful and whimsical nature of the Barbie dream house. And she referenced Pee-wee's Big Adventure, the paintings of Wayne Thiebaud and Gene Kelly's apartment flat in the 1951 Technicolor musical An American in Paris. Like, she really wanted that kind of like stage presence, that sound stage, interior stage look. You know, you knew you wanted it, like she wanted it to look fake, but also real. And they did a really good job. Like, I really enjoyed the aesthetics of Barbie Land, and even like the miniatures that, you know, that they used for a lot of this kind of stuff. It was pretty interesting. You know, like for instance, the sky and the San Jacinto mountains were captured using practical effects instead of computer generated imagery. The set design featured a very specific shade of pink paint, which is known as Pantone 219, which, and this is 100% true, they used so much of it that it resulted in an international shortage due to how much they used in this movie. They caused an international shortage of pink paint. Go figure on this one. And then, of course, you know, she had wanted to talk to other directors to help get inspiration. So she spoke to Peter Weir, aiming to create like an interior soundstage world that would be distinct and imaginative and be completely different from the real world. And it does work. Like, you're watching the movie and they're in Barbie Land and they're, you know, they have their houses and they have their cars and everything looks like it just came out of Mattel, right? It looks like it came out of Mattel and that it's designed specifically for this world. I mean, they even did a Barbie themed Airbnb in Malibu that you can actually like stay at right now for at least the next couple weeks. It's very expensive. I've seen pictures of it. I would probably go insane from the amount of pink that's in there, but it's still really interesting. You know what I mean? It's still really fascinating. So once they got all that done, once they got everything else ready to go, they finally were able to go and shoot the movie March 22nd, 2022, Warner Brothers Studios in Leavesden. They didn't even shoot this movie in America. They shot the location stuff in LA, but they shot all the Barbie stuff in the UK. And that concluded on July 21st, 2022. And then, of course, they did some reshoots in April of 2023. So almost like 10 months later, or a little over 10 months later from, less than that, from when they shot the movie, to get a couple little things that just needed to like refine. I'm not too sure what scenes those are, to be honest with you, but I did know one thing was missing. And that was the thing everybody wanted. And if I'm going to, before I dive into my thoughts about the overall film, I got to talk about the Barbie girl. Okay. Because being a child of the 90s, right? 80s and 90s, the 1997 song Barbie Girl by Aqua, I was 15 when that came out. That song was huge. That song is still great. Aqua was just performing in Los Angeles like 2 weeks ago. And my best friend went up there to go see him from San Diego and sent me pictures and was like, "I wish you were here." And I was like, "Me too." You know, but obviously Aqua's Barbie Girl is a big one. Well, it turns out, and I didn't know this until just looking this up, that there was a lot of bad blood between Mattel and MCA Records, who published the song here in America. And there's apparently a lot of lawsuits over the song from 1997 to 2002. And so instead of just licensing the song from MCA Records, working with Aqua, which would have been fantastic to have them come out and promote the movie while they're on tour in America right before the movie comes out, they chose to go to Nicki Minaj and Ice Spice to do an adaptation, a rework of this song. It samples Barbie Girl, but the song's called Barbie World. And the only word I can use to describe it, folks, is it's cancer. It's bad. It's terrible. I can't stand it. It's so bad. And it plays during a really interesting end credit scene. So I had to kind of like suffer my way through the song. I hate the song. It's so bad. Just like, you know what it is, man? I'm gonna get a digital copy of Barbie when it comes out, and I'm just gonna slap on Barbie Girl at the end of that, or I'm just gonna play it on my phone and turn the music down. That's how much I hate it. So anyway, the movie ultimately came out July 21st, 2023, going up against Oppenheimer. We know the Barbenheimer movement, what comes across as a very natural, oddly paired set of counter programming, has done quite well. And a lot of people have seen Oppenheimer, and a lot of people have seen Barbie, and a lot of people like both movies, which is great. It's like I said, it's this event of the summer. It's the event of the year. I literally don't see anything else coming out for the rest of this year that's going to have this kind of a hype surrounding it. And that's fantastic for those of us who love movies. In fact, even Cillian Murphy, who is in Oppenheimer, is completely in support of this. Christopher Nolan, completely in support of this. I think the only person who's not, like, he'll be supportive on the outside, but inside is stewing, is Tom Cruise, because, you know, Mission Impossible got bumped from the Dolby screenings, got bumped from the IMAX screenings, and Dead Reckoning is a big, big, bold, crazy movie that did not get the play that it needed, probably to really end up having a lot of legs in the large premium format, but that's a whole other conversation. But anyway, let me talk about the movie itself. Let me talk about Barbie and how I feel about the movie, because I have a lot of conflicting emotions in regards to, like, let's say the narrative that it is, right? And this is where we're, by the way, going clearly into spoiler territory. We should know that by now. The movie, again, just from a male perspective, all right, you know, and it's very much on the nose for how it treats Kens. The Kens have no purpose. They're just there as accessories. We know this. Barbie goes through an existential crisis that forces her to have to leave Barbie Land in order to head into the real world to mend a rift. And that completely has like no backup. No, it doesn't even play a part in the movie after she leaves. It's literally just a setup. And I didn't really care for that because I thought they could do it in a much more interesting and engaging way. I mean, obviously there's the misdirect where we think that she's going to go talk to Sasha, the child, but instead she's going to go talk to the mom, played by America Ferrera, because that's where she's having this connection. And it's handled very poorly. And many will probably argue that it's not the most necessary aspect of the movie. It's not the most necessary thing. But I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree because you still have to have that core story, that core plot to drive from beginning to end. If the whole point of the movie is to get to Barbie discovering her self-worth during a Kendom uprising, I feel like there's a whole bunch of the real world stuff that they didn't even need to put in there. It just didn't need to happen. But obviously getting from point A to point B and having it be a fish out of water and having the realization come from that makes all the sense in the world. What I didn't care for, quite frankly, is like almost all of the real world stuff. I just felt that was like almost largely pointless because it just, that to me was more cartoony and more cringe than what the Barbie Land was supposed to be. Right. And maybe that was by design, but obviously the social commentary is a key part of this movie. You know, like, why is it that the Mattel CEO, you know, is trying to, you know, what happened with the Skipper incident? We get no context for that. What exactly is going to be different if Barbie Land, isn't restored to normal. Like what, they don't ever dive in to give us any of that information. They allude to the fact that there's going to be this like massive, changing Ken dolls are selling out now. It's such a weird thing. It's so out of left field. It just stops the story dead in its tracks. And maybe that is just meant to be a buffer in order to get to the next scene, to continue the main plot, to continue the character development. That's some of the elements of it there. Like the interpersonal stuff was great. Some of that extra stuff didn't really work for me. But I'll give the movie another watch at some point in time, and maybe that will grow on me quite a bit. Now, the scene, though, where Barbie is kind of realizing that she's not the savior of women, and she's sitting down at the bus stop, and there's the old woman there, and she looks at her, and she just says, "You're beautiful." And the woman saying, "I know," and then them having this moment, that was actually going to be cut. Warner Brothers wanted that cut, but Greta fought to keep that scene in. And while the scene largely just feels so kind of tonally different from everything else, it's a very sweet scene. And I like the scene quite a bit. Like that was a good little thing, and that was her obviously starting to realize that the world is not perfect and you can find beauty in everything, obviously. And that part I thought was really good, even though it just kind of felt very weird. It kind of stops the movie a little bit and has that moment, but that moment's okay. And then of course you get like the Rhea Perlman moment when she's running from the board of Mattel. She's in again, this very, here's the thing. This movie bumped, by the way, I didn't talk about this in the release stuff, but this movie bumped Coyote versus Acme. Right. They were going to do a Wile E. Coyote movie. And this bumped that movie. And yet this scene where like Will Ferrell and the other board members are chasing her through one of the floors with all these weird cubicles, to me very much felt like it was, it felt like an Acme cartoon, like a Looney Tunes cartoon. And then she kind of goes into this weird being John Malkovich type situation where she meets the creator of Barbie. She doesn't know that, but if you kind of know anything about who created Barbie, when you hear her name is Ruth, you're going to know that. And then that being said, like later on, we find out that this is the ghost of the woman who created Barbie. I think because she died, I want to say like early 2000s. Right. And so she's a ghost of the woman who created Barbie, and she like lives on the 17th floor. It's just like, it's just so like, I know it's over the top. I know it's meant to be, those little moments just like were kind of lost on me because I feel it just goes so far into this like comical space that it just ends up like, whatever. But then we get into the Ken stuff. And I think the Ken stuff largely is the most interesting facet of the film, because here's a guy who has ultimately no value outside of what is told to him. Like even when he's trying to do the boyfriend girlfriend thing with Barbie, he's in love with her and she has no interest, like literally no interest. And then she just tells him, "I don't want you here, leave." Right. She's very cold and very callous with Ken. So when he finally gets a little bit of that recognition, he goes hog wild. It shows, obviously it's meant to showcase like toxic masculinity and how that kind of recognition can go too far, and how that kind of response to that can go too far. Obviously, what's interesting is the whole notion of like the end of the movie, right? Because the Kens take over, they're gonna like vote on a constitutional decree to change the name to Kendom Land, and like the Barbies have to then more or less act in a very mean-spirited way to pit them against each other in order to then vote unanimously without any opposition. And I feel like that was that to me was really where it kind of lost me at the end of the movie a little bit. And I say that because it's like, it would have been better, in my opinion, if the Kens would have at that point realized that they had been duped, or realized that they weren't there, and then gone in and then like demanded like an equal, demanded the vote. But at that point, it brings everyone together. You can still have the same emotional conclusion, but you have it in a way where everybody kind of understands that, like, when everyone needs to kind of follow their own footsteps, sort of thing. Because the final, conversation between Barbie and Ken, where Ken's like, having his moment. He's having his freak out. And she finally realizes that she took him for granted, and she apologizes, and that, and explains that he doesn't need her to be complete. That was really good. But like I said, like I feel like the movie just kind of misses the mark a little bit, where like, I read a review that said like the messaging was rather scattershot and not the most subversive, which I agree with. I enjoy the messaging. I like what it was trying to say, but I feel like it was leading to this like crescendo, to this apex, to the top of this hill, where it could really address the fact that both sexes have to deal with certain expectations, and the fact that like we're not allowed in many instances to show emotion, or to show too much excitement, or too much anger, or anything. We have to be certain things. There's these expectations placed on everybody. And you know what? It's unfair. It's absolutely unfair. But this is a movie called Barbie. So they're not going to do that. And that was my biggest complaint with the film. They were right there. They were just right there and couldn't do it. But I did chuckle at the last bit of the movie when Barbie decides to turn human, and she decides to turn human. And then the end of the movie with her going to a gynecologist, because like, and that's the thing too. I was wondering that when she's talking with like, and maybe this is just me being a male, but like she's talking with Rhea Perlman's character, with Ruth's character, and Ruth is like, I don't have to give you permission to be a woman. And then there's this montage of all these women and these mothers and these aunts and sisters and everything else. And during this time, I'm like, this is her transition to being a woman. This is her becoming human. And earlier in the movie, she admits that she doesn't have genitals, and neither does Ken. But then it's like during this moment, my thought, and again, it was just like during this montage, it's meant to be sweet, meant to be fun, whatever. I'm like, so is she going to grow a vagina? Because like she's becoming human. Obviously, this is not subtle, but like, is she growing a vagina? That's my question right now. Is this what's happening? And then the last scene of the movie, she goes that. So I don't know if that was just like something said in there by Greta to kind of lead to that thought process at some point in time. Like, she's becoming human. Did she fully transition? Is she still just like got nothing down there? Right. So she's just going to be super alone on a Saturday night. Like, what's happening here? And then they end it with the joke. And I thought that was kind of funny. I thought that was cute. So like I said, the political side of the movie was interesting. I thought it had good messaging, even if it didn't quite nail it. But it gave us really good performances all the way through. The supporting cast I did enjoy. There was not a bad performance in the movie. It was all really good. And that part to me is the stuff that I wouldn't mind watching it again. But there's also the talk about, is there going to be a sequel? I don't know if there's going to be a sequel. I don't know if there should be a sequel. These movies don't necessarily need a sequel, so to speak. But that being said, we actually did find out more about the critical response because, obviously this movie's done pretty well. It's been pretty positive, actually. According to reviews from critics and audiences, it has received acclaim for its visually dazzling comedy and smartly executed meta humor, which is true. It's got complimented for subversive storytelling, which, I could see that. Rotten Tomatoes has given the film a 90% approval rating with an audience score of about 8.1 out of 10. Metacritic is giving it an 8 out of 10. And CinemaScore gave it an A, while PostTrack reported that the film had an overall positive score from viewers, with 79% saying that they would definitely recommend the film, which means that, even though I don't know if there's a reason necessarily to go back to the theaters to go see it, there are a lot of people who are going to be recommending it to people, and that's always good for theaters. So as of July 23rd, so the day before I recorded this, the movie has grossed $162 million in the United States, 182 in other territories, bringing it to a worldwide total in just a couple days of $344 million on a $145 million budget, meaning this movie is going to make a lot of money for Warner Brothers. And a lot of this probably has to do with the phenomenon known as Barbenheimer. Again, as I mentioned, the fact that both of these movies came out, there was a lot of people talking about a double feature, a lot of people loving the idea of a double feature. And basically, over the course of the weekend, 79% of tickets that were sold were actually for the two films combined, with 52% of those tickets being for Barbie, resulting in 18.5 million people going for the Barbenheimer double feature, which I think will be happening again in its second weekend. And that is where I think the real story of the movie is. Like, what is it about this that prompted so much of a response? Now, what I want to know is your guys' thoughts on this as I get into the controversy, the final part of the show. Here's the link to call on in so you guys can call in, give me your thoughts real quick. I'm very curious. Let me just get a drink of water. So, the last thing I want to touch upon here is the weirdest controversy about this movie is the Vietnam controversy, right? We're going back to Nam, boys. You know, when this doll came out, Nam was happening, right? And of course the movie is going to have some stupid controversy, right? All the right-wing idiots here in the United States calling it woke. Vietnam bans the movie because they can't do math, essentially. So what it is it's all about the 9-line controversy. And this has to do with the alleged inclusion of the 9-line, a maritime border claimed by the government of the People's Republic of China and disputed by other countries in the South China Sea region. Vietnam's Film Censorship Authority banned the movie, claiming that it contained offending messages of the 9-line, while the Philippines blurred. The issue is significant as both countries previously banned other movies that included the actual 9-line. There was an animated movie out of China about like a Yeti. I forget what it was called, but like they had the 9-line, and that was a big controversy when that thing came out. You know, but I believe the movie was made like with China in mind. So yeah, that kind of propaganda is going to be there, right? So Vietnam announced that the ban was happening, stating that the film contained multiple instances of the 9-line. The censorship decision was seen as a reflection of the deep-rooted anti-China sentiment in the country's political culture. However, some experts did argue that the censorship might not have supported historical or traditional justice, just limiting free and open discussions, which is entirely possible. Now, in the Philippines, the concerns arose about the alleged denigration of Filipino sovereignty in the film, leading to calls for a ban from some senators. Others suggested that adding disclaimers or editing the references to the 9-line, but the Movie and Television Review and Classification Board eventually allowed the film to be screened in the country, but requested that Warner Brothers blur the controversial lines to avoid further misinterpretations. Yeah, it's a childlike crayon drawing from a character named Weird Barbie, and there weren't 9 dashes. There were only 8, and it was in the shape of like a trail. So no, it like you had American politicians going on television and crying and complaining over this thing, saying that the movie supports China, right? When that's not the case at all. It became politicized for something that was just a misinterpretation. And that to me is always the craziest aspect of this, right? And yes, it was barely on screen. It was only on screen a couple times in the movie. But to get some more thoughts and to get some more opinions on this one, we got David joining the call. David, how's it going?
Good evening. How are you?
Doing well. So what are your thoughts on the Barbie movie? Two white men discussing the Barbie movie.
I know, right? I loved it. So I was one of those millions of people that actually went to go see Oppenheimer the same day as Barbie, but I loved everything about this. This was, even from the opening frame to even, the narration of Helen Mirren to the themes of the film. Did it have its problems? Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't perfect, and no film usually is, but um, overall, it really it was good. was really good. And you touched upon it a lot, but the acting, the production design, and I didn't find really a false note in there.
For
What?
me, if it was really just like the final messaging, I feel like, I've got my own, history with like, like when I used to be what you would probably call a chud, right? I always felt I was fair, but I still would look at things from those angles, which is why I completely understand their playbook. But I also know a lot of dudes that feel aimless and lost, and they don't have direction. And it's like, to be in a moment where there might be something that conveys everybody working together, and then that just kind of gets shot down.
Yeah,
Like, I can see, that's my biggest thing with this movie is like that falter on their part is going to lead to some people getting amped up enough to start thinking that the commentators that are bashing this movie without even really understanding what's being said are right. And that to me is like the only, and that's not even really a fault of the movie. You know what I mean? That's just like a societal critique that I've got. But like, like the movie itself, I thought the script was well written. I thought like the Ken song was really good. And I totally forgot to mention that was actually a joke, right? Mark Ronson, who did Uptown Funk with Bruno Mars, he actually wrote that as more of a gag
oh wow.
and showed it to like Ryan Gosling and like Greta and Ryan, and they loved it. And Ryan wanted it to be the ballad of the movie.
Nice.
And so they actually ended up like campaigning to get that in the film as like a musical number. And that song has apparently been streamed on like Spotify, like a lot, so I have that might even get nominated for best original song.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to be fair, I think it should. I really think it should. It's just like, I thought it was really good. I thought it was that's probably my favorite part of the movie was that ballad, because it was just like, you get it, right? Like, I'm a 10, but she thinks I'm a friend, and it's like, he's stuck in this world and he doesn't know what to do. And there's a lot there. It's really interesting on its commentary.
Yeah, when
And
you
then,
listen to the lyrics of it, you go, "Oh wow, okay."
yeah, like,
This is, you know, um,
but that was where, when I was watching the movie last night, girls were pulling out their cell phones and they were recording the screen when that was on.
yeah,
So
that's,
I mean, like, that, of course, is going to be one of the cultural takeaways. Is going to be this like pain ballad of a guy who's like, oh my God, like I it's like, I'm rejected by this woman I was literally built for, and now we're going to go to war.
it's funny. I was actually watching Toy Story 3 last night, and of course, it had the Ken and the Barbie in it, and made me think of the movie. But yeah, no, my only one critique, if I had any, was so at the final 15 minutes, there were a couple of slow portions. Which, America Ferrera, who I thought was amazing, she gave her soliloquy, and then you
She
had
did. That's an award-winning performance in my
she's going to
opinion.
get nominated, no
Oh,
doubt.
100%, 100%. Yeah.
And then you had that that little montage of the Barbies getting them back because they figured out, okay, this is what we need to do. And then you had that other little slow scene with Ruth, in which you were talking about. And I think if they had put something a little, I don't want to say upbeat, but something else to kind of buffer that in there, because it was, for a good 10 or 12 minutes, it was really, really slow. And, but that's the only thing.
Well, I mean,
My only criticism there.
I can see your point there. Like I said though, about like the whole plan to distract
Right.
the Kens. I do view that as being wildly mean spirited,
Mhm.
right? Like, and that was my complaint with the movie, was like, there's no responsibility taken
And you could
by,
even see, like, when in the bonfire scene, you could
yeah.
even see, like, high-fiving each other as they're switching Kens.
Yeah, because there's like the voiceover that says like, and when
Mhm.
they're on top of the world, take everything from them,
Yeah.
right? And it's like that right there. And again, talking about like the con, I get what it's saying in context, but what you have is, you've also got, like, again, other young men are going to watch that, and they're going to view that entirely differently, because at the end of the movie, when they go, well, can we get like one Ken on the Supreme Court? And she's like, no. You get maybe on the lower court, and like, yeah, you got to start somewhere. Like, I get the joke, But again, it's following the line of all that. Is this going to be this, like, again, that's like where it starts becoming like, it's like it's take everything men love that they were already like denied anyway, right? To some extent. And then, yeah, they overreacted, but it's like, let's build them up. Now let's break them down. Now let's hurt them and let's turn them against each other so we can then assume control. And so you watch this whole scene play out, and I'm like, I get the point, but it is so wildly like if Barbie's, because this shows you they simply do not care about Ken's. They do not care about Ken's. And so as a result of Ken coming back with the patriarchy and then explaining the patriarchy and then completely brainwashing these women that are like Nobel laureates and physicists and astronauts and doctors into just being like, bouncy airheaded bimbos. You're like, okay, like there's plot discussions here where like the movie has really good messaging. It's got a really good point. I like it, but it's like, now you're just throwing things at the wall and hoping to cobble to get together a narrative. And that was probably like the first half of the movie, very strong. The second half of the movie really sputters in a few places. And I just feel like it's, because Ken is the sympathetic character in the movie, right? Like we are largely meant to identify with him more so than Barbie, because, people ask themselves, what am I doing? What's my point? What's this? What's that? And so that's where I just find it to be the most interesting.
It will be interesting to see when, obviously we look at it right now and it's wildly successful and huge and everything else. Be interesting to see when we go back and look at this in 5 years and say, that's because that's going to be the real test of, not about how much money it made or how many Oscars it's going to win, because as you said, and I agree with you, this is going to get at least 6 or 7 nominations.
Oh, 100%. And it's deserved. It's absolutely deserved. Yeah.
I absolutely see Margot Robbie getting Best Actress nomination. I see, America Ferrera Best Supporting Actress. I could see even Ryan Gosling getting possibly a Best Supporting Actor nomination. You're definitely going to see a Best Production Design, Best Original Song, whether it's adapted or original, Best Screenplay, and Best Director. I could see this getting 7, Matt, easily. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see when we look back in 5 years, if what we take away from this and how it's done.
Yeah. And I hope that there is a conversation about the movie that's productive. I don't want there to be a fight around this movie, despite whatever I might think of it in regards to my criticisms about the portrayal of certain things. I understand its meaning. And I think that's the difference there. It's like, you got to like look at it past what the initial emotions are, because I feel like that's going to be the problem, because everyone is all emotion based, right? Yeah. So with everything being as emotion based as it is, it's going to make it very difficult, I think, for some people to get to kind of like get over that. But yeah, 5 years from now, I think it's going to be doing pretty well. And that puts us at an hour. Been a quick hour, guys, like a really quick hour. I was really surprised. So thank you, David, for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you guys are listening to this on podcast, please feel free to head over to Apple and leave a like. And then please feel free to subscribe to PODIO Commentary here on YouTube. I'll be back tomorrow night to talk about 65, a movie that I'm excited to see. And you guys have a good one. Thank you again, and peace out.